Hi, I'm Tom Harper,
And I'm Diana Thomas,
and welcome to That Wilbur Smith Show.
a podcast about the historical, geographical, natural, and human background to the world of Wilbur Smith.
We went up through the double oaken doors into the panelled hall, which is the high temple of our profession. There is a hushed dignity about the building which I find reassuring and permanent in this insane and transitory modern world. Side by side, we climbed the sweeping staircase, past the portraits of great men and the lists of former medalists honoured by the Society. I'm a modest and almost painfully retiring person, but the very first time I had entered here and looked up at the portraits, I had imagined my own dark visage peering down from the wall of honour. I had even selected the pose, seated to avoid undue emphasis on my body, with my head turned half away. I have a good right-hand profile. There would be a flecking of dignified grey at the temples, a gay little ribbon of some foreign decoration in my lapel, Legion of Honour, perhaps. The expression pensive, the brow furrowed.
Those were the words of Ben Kazim, the hunchbacked archaeologist hero of The Sunbird by Wilbur Smith. And they describe the Royal Geographical Society in Kensington, which is where we happen to be not so long ago for the awarding of the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize. This had a number of categories for younger writers and various other things, but the main prize went to Emma Stiles for her wonderful book, No Country for Girls, and we are absolutely thrilled to be joined by Emma today to talk about her book. So let's start with the kind of beginning, which is what gave you the idea for this extraordinary kind of road trip thriller with two very unlikely protagonists.
Thanks, Diana. And just to say thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to be chatting to you all. I love getting asked this question, and I have been asked it a fair few times. I wrote No Country for Girls, on the crime fiction MA course at the University of East Anglia. And I started the course and the book in September 2018. And when I went on that course with a very clear idea of what I was going to write, which was not this book. And I think in the second week, we were given a writing exercise, which was write a scene where two characters meet for the first time in a public place. And I wrote this scene, and it was in Karrakatta Cemetery, which is the cemetery where the book opens with Charlie, who's one of my protagonists. And that cemetery, Karrakatta, is across the street from the high school where I went to in Perth, in Western Australia. The high school isn't there anymore, but the cemetery still is. And these characters appeared, and I had never had such an immediate sense of character before. They pretty well appeared fully formed, started arguing in my head, and didn't stop. And I knew that they had a lot of stuff to work out, and I knew that they could carry a whole novel. I knew that I would send them on a road trip, although at that point I didn't know where they were going to
I
go.
mean, it's a very, very intense beginning for two reasons. Firstly, you begin with this young, working class Australian teenager, and she's the narrator. And so for the English reader, you're sort of hit with this kind of flood of slang and dialect, and you kind of have to work out. And after a page or two, you sort of get into the kind of mood of what she's talking about. And then something really, really, really shocking happens. So I don't know if you want to talk about that because in a sense it's a spoiler alert, but it's a spoiler that happens in the first 10 pages. But boy, you start your book off with, well, really a bang, a crunch, a crunch. I think you started off with.
I know. Yeah, it's fine to talk about that because it does happen at the end of chapter 1, although I won't go into any detail. But um,
Let's say an axe is involved.
A cleaver, a meat cleaver.
A meat cleaver, you're right, a meat cleaver, and it cleaves. We'll just say that a meat cleaver does its job. But perhaps not where it's meant to do.
no. And according to Nao, who has by that time met Charlie and is somewhat involved peripherally in this incident, it makes a sound like someone chopping into a pumpkin. Let's just leave it at that.
Indeed, indeed. Yes. I mean, I don't know how many times you had to chop cleavers into various objects in order to come up with that metaphor.
I'm not sure that I actually did, but I did a lot of trying to choreograph that scene. So I'll say a little bit about it. But first of all, I'll say something about Charlie's character. Yes, Charlie, her voice was so strong as soon as she appeared, and I'm so glad that I didn't really mess with her. I didn't. I didn't in the edit. My editor is in the UK and has never been to Western Australia, and he didn't really want me to tone Charlie's character down. And she really is a one-off, and she does express herself in ways that even I've had quite a few Australian readers have trouble getting into her voice themselves. So I've had a whole mix of responses to her, which I thought would happen. I thought she would be a bit of a Marmite character, but she was just such a strong character, and I had to leave her pretty well as she was in my head. And yeah, and that incident, I just did a lot of choreographing. She has stolen a gold bar from her older sister's boyfriend, Daryl.
Which in itself raises loads of questions, because who just has a gold bar lying around? So and it's kind of taken for granted that, oh, he has this gold bar. But as a reader, you're sitting there thinking, there's something not quite right here. This is weird from the off.
Yeah, I know. I've had a lot of people say, oh, you do raise so many questions so quickly, which I obviously didn't think about at the time. I just, again, I'm the kind of writer that once I have a strong sense of my characters, things happen on the page and I don't always know why. And then I have to go back and plot the thing and figure out why. I can't remember now when the gold appeared, but I had to figure out why has he got this gold? How has he got hold of it? And that had to fit in with a historical gold theft, and it had to fit in with the whole plot, which was a big challenge actually, but fun to do, very fun.
Just to get back to Charlie and the way she speaks.
Yeah.
Two things really. Firstly, I'm guessing that, as it were, you weren't having to kind of imagine how you kind of know how that girl speaks because having gone to that high school. Because it's often a real problem for an articulate writer to write a character who doesn't speak kind of perfect grammar or whatever without seeing that in some way you're patronizing your own character. You know, if you go into a particular voice, if it's not completely authentic, it can seem very much like you're talking down. If you know, like you're almost like being a bit snobbish towards your own character, whereas actually Charlie seems completely real.
Yeah, I really, I'd written several young adult novels, which had not been published, so I was quite used to writing teenage voices. Uh, but I think the main thing was just that both these characters, Nao and Charlie, were such strong personalities right from the start that in a way I could not possibly have talked down to them. It felt at many times that they were the ones writing the book, and all I had to do, don't get me wrong, I had some difficult times with it. You do always come up against yourself and things not working. But when I relaxed, it really felt like these two characters were writing the story. Once I knew roughly where they were going to go and some of the major things that needed to happen along the way, it honestly felt like I was pointing them and just letting them go. So it didn't even that whole. I know what you mean by that question, and
I mean, it's not so much that you actually are doing that; it's that people can take it as though you are doing it.
yes, yes. I mean, one of the things that we did, me and my editor had a little discussion about, was her swearing. And we had this funny thing where it was like, not even, we'd done one edit, we'd done the structural edit. He hadn't mentioned the swearing. No one had mentioned the swearing. So I was like, great, no one has mentioned the swearing. It's fine. And only when we got to the line edit does he then mention the swearing. And he said something like, I personally love the way Charlie swears, but maybe we need to. So, and I had such a huge reaction to this. I was furious. I mean, privately, I didn't tell him this, but I had smoke coming out of my ears. I was so furious because I thought, don't you dare ask me to censor this young woman. Like, that's not going to happen. But then I found this thing online. In the meantime, I did a bit of Googling about the amount of swearing that's, acceptable. I found this thing online from Jericho writers who run all sorts of writing courses and advice, and it was a thing called the Fuckety score. And basically, you just put in, like, you count up all your swear words, and you put in your word count of the whole book, and it comes up with a score. And I was way off the scale. I was way off even the highest scale of the grittiest crime novel. So I thought, right, okay, maybe he's got a point. So then I went through it and I took out, this is going to seem unbelievable to people who've read it, I took out 40% of Charlie's swearing.
Now with 40% less fucked, you have that on the, like a kind of sticker on the
And then
front.
you see, when I got the edit, because I hadn't actually had my notes from my editor at that point, when I didn't tell him I had taken out 40%, and he'd been reading the previous draft, and when he sent me the edit, he didn't have any mention of the swearing. And I said to him, Cal, what about the swearing? You said you wanted me. And he said, oh no, I read it again and I thought it was fine. So he hadn't even, I'm glad that I took it out, because it wasn't needed. And it also made me really think about how it made me dig a bit deeper into how Charlie was expressing herself, because, like you have said, it's a challenge. I realized, I thought, okay, I'm trying to write a character who isn't very articulate. Why am I doing this? This is crazy. But it just because she was such a strong personality, and I needed her to be able to get. She's got a lot going on. Both these characters have got a lot going on, emotionally and otherwise, and I just needed to work harder to get that across.
And her lack of articulateness is a reflection of her kind of inner frustrations in her life, all the things that she can't get out, and sometimes those things then express themselves in violence, which of course is then what sort of kickstarts the plot. So it all, you're right, you have to write the character that way, because it's all part and parcel of the character, I think, and it works brilliantly. I just want to talk about Neo a bit as well, because we've been talking about Charlie so far. Where did she come from, and what can you tell us about her?
Well, they really did appear simultaneously, and Neo and they appeared simultaneously, and I knew in that first little writing exercise that they had all these differences and points of conflict, which were just like a kind of gift to me as the author. So I knew Neo was Aboriginal. I didn't know anything about her background apart from that. I knew that she had grown up in I knew pretty early on that she had grown up in relative privilege compared to Charlie, and that she was much better educated. Charlie has been expelled from school for fighting, but at the point we meet the characters, Nao is in her first year of studying law at university. And I think the main difference between the two characters, despite their different backgrounds, Nao is straight and Charlie is a young queer character. The main difference, though, is in their personalities. And Nao took, although she appeared, I could see her very clearly. I got her voice pretty clearly, but she was a character that, in a way, took longer to arrive, took longer for me to get to know her, and I think that's for two reasons. I think partly she's a very considered person. She's thinking a lot more about things. In those early chapters, she's actually really driving the plot, although that might not be obvious. Charlie's the one who's reacting, um, and is the kind of louder, in your face character.
But Naya has the ideas, doesn't she? She's the one who's saying, "We've got to do this. We've got to move on."
Exactly, because she knows. Nao is running from her own incident at home, uh, and so she's thinking on her feet and trying to. She's obviously got herself into an even deeper, difficult situation because she's run into Charlie, uh, and then this incident with Daryl has happened. But Nao's got her own thing going on, so she's trying to think about how she can get how she can put distance between herself and this incident, how she can, is she going to use Charlie, is this an opportunity, or is she going to have to ditch Charlie? They're both, I think, there are many times actually, certainly in the early part of the road trip, when these characters just want to ditch each other and go in opposite directions.
What was it that made you take that road trip? I mean, the road trip is, it's one of the kind of contemporary genres of kind of thriller fiction. And it's like the oldest story ever. It's a journey. I mean, it's the original quest story, isn't it? And to an extent, the plot forces them to go on the road. Was it that the journey arose out of that necessity to get away from a very terrible thing that's happened, to physically get away, get out, escape? Or was that something that was always kind of baked into to your concept of how these two people would evolve together?
Well, when in that writing exercise, when these characters appeared, I think, or soon after that, I wrote the scene of the meeting. I didn't know, didn't have any context for it, um, but I had in my mind, probably for a couple of years before that, the idea of writing a Thelma and Louise style story, and
I'm so glad you said those two words, and I didn't.
I had that in my mind, and it was pretty well as soon as I met these two characters, I knew they were the characters for the story. So, because of that, I knew that they would go on a road trip. I didn't know where it was going to go, I didn't know anything else about the plot, but it was meeting them that I knew that they had enough in them to carry a whole novel. I also knew that they had enough to work out, that they needed a big story. And so to go on a pretty epic road trip was going to work for these characters. I knew that pretty well right away.
I'd like to just ask about your own background and how that affected the novel, because just reading your biography, I guess you were born in the UK, grew up in Australia, and then moved back to the UK and have been here for a while.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm really fascinated by the idea of writing about the place that you aren't. And were you always drawn to write about Australia as the place that you'd kind of moved away from, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I've always pretty well, without exception, written about Western Australia. So yeah, I was born in London. We emigrated to Western Australia when I was 9. That was with my whole family, me and 3 siblings and my parents. And that the year after we moved there, none of us had been to Australia before. We started road tripping. We started road tripping north, and that was our way of getting to know this new country. And I came back here in my 20s. I thought I was coming for 2 years, which seemed like such a long time. So I had my growing up and formative years in Western Australia. I went to school there. I went to vet school there and became a qualified vet. And I worked for a couple of years there in various places, mostly rural places. and yeah, I thought I was coming back to the UK for 2 years to have a bit of a working holiday.
The kind of classic Australian kind of spend a couple of years in
Yes,
Europe sort of thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of friends doing the same thing at the time, but none of them had British passports. They all had to go back. And various things happened, and I just stayed longer and longer. And one of the so I started writing stuff in the late 90s, and that was out of homesickness for Western Australia. I was desperately homesick for at least 10 years, and it's crazy to think, why did I stay and not go back? But that writing about landscape and the people that I loved was a way of staying in touch with the place, and that just continued. So, every novel I have written that has not been published they have all been set in WA in different places.
Can I just ask one last question? You've now very deservedly won the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize, and I'm just curious as to whether, because I used to run some crime writing prizes, and one of the staple things that you heard from the winners was, I didn't even know I'd written a crime novel. And certainly I think previous winners of the Wilbur Smith Prize have stood up there and said, gosh, I didn't even know I was writing an adventure novel. So I was just curious whether you were conscious of writing an adventure novel as you wrote it, and now that it's been kind of recognized in this way, whether you see it that way.
I definitely didn't see it that way when I was writing it. I was, like I said, I was doing this crime writing course. I felt like, okay, I'm writing a crime thriller. I did have the big Thelma and Louise inspiration going on, and so I was thinking of it. This is a crime road trip thriller. But interestingly, as soon as I heard about the award, I kind of felt that we were a good fit. I pretty well felt that straight away. Good friend of mine, Lizzie Pook, was on the shortlist last year for her beautiful book Moonlight and the Pearler's Daughter, and it was that. So she was kind of a bit of an inspiration. I thought, okay, and I felt like we were a good fit for the genre, and it made me look at my life and realize I'd done all these really adventurous things, which was very cool. And all summer, I've been saying to people, I'm never going to win that in a million years, but I'm just so happy to be on the shortlist, which was absolutely true. I think I thought, yes, I thought we were a good fit, but I guess I thought that so much of this adventure is what goes on between the two characters, and I thought maybe that wasn't quite enough. So the fact that people have said that that's one of the things they love about the book has just honestly, the whole thing has made my year, because that's what I was trying to do with this book, was to communicate something about these characters, and I feel like I've done that.
Brilliant. Well, you absolutely deserve it. So many, many congratulations.
Yeah, it's a fabulous book. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And we're delighted today to be joined by Georgina Brown, the foundation manager of the Wilbur and Niso Smith Foundation, which, amongst many other good works, manages the awards. So welcome, Georgina.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks, Diana. It's lovely to be here with you both today, and Emma as well, having a chance to talk all things adventure.
I had a great time at the awards. And the thing that really came across to me particularly as I was watching the actual awards, the ceremony itself, was just what an extraordinary variety of authors. I mean, because we should say that the youngest prize is for people 11 to 16. Is that right? Did I get that right? The age range.
We have the author of Tomorrow, so it's a short story competition for writers 21 and under. But that's split into 3 different categories. So the youngest category is 11 and under.
And the winner of that,
so they're tiny.
Well, she wasn't. She was. I mean, the girl who won that was the most articulate, self-confident. I mean, she probably did the single most professional response and sort of presentation and thank you of anybody. But what was really fascinating was, and this goes back to the whole question of who can tell what stories, whatever, but you had storytellers kind of trying to do the same thing, engaging in the same way, and they came from Ghana and Guyana, and they came from different parts of the USA, and they came from Canada and Britain, Australia, wherever. And that's what really struck me, was the kind of global aspect of it, but also, which is kind of soppy, I guess, but the fact that so many people from so many different places and so many different ages were kind of trying to do the same thing and having the same motivations to tell stories. And it's a very human, very profound thing that we just all have, which is the need to express something about our lives and our stories.
Absolutely. I think storytelling is one of those, it's something that humans have been doing ever since we've been a civilized species.
Long before that, long before any civilized, when literally people sitting on fire.
Well, absolutely. And, there's people traveling from kind of different communities. Storytelling would be a way of saying what they'd come from, where they were going to. It was a way of passing information, as well as kind of entertaining each other in the evenings. And I think that's something that the adventure genre still does very well. It not only can entertain and educate, it can also just teach you something new about the world, about different places in the world, about different people in the world, and do that in a really fun way.
Yeah, Lee Child always has this thing that adventure and also crime and thrillers, that's the original form of storytelling. It's the person who goes out, and I've spoken to anthropologists too, but like the person who defends the tribe from the external threat, or the person who goes on a quest. Those are the original, absolutely basic human stories, and that's kind of what the Adventure Prize is.
Also, from a practical information point of view, I've just been rereading Wilbur Smith's Blue Horizon for a future episode. And of course, there you learn how to cross a crocodile-infested river using only a stick and a piece of string. So, yes, there is lots of cold, hard, useful information to be had from these books. But storytelling is obviously quite core to the existence of the foundation. So do you want to, for listeners who aren't familiar with all the things Foundation does, do you want to just talk a bit about the sort of the raison d'etre of it?
Absolutely.
And what you're all about? Because it's more than just the prizes.
It is. The prize is our flagship program. So that is kind of the biggest event of the year, and the biggest kind of pots of work, I'll call them, that take place across the year. So that itself is split into categories for published, unpublished, and young writers. So a lot of work happens within each of those categories with each of those different sets of people. But then outside of that, we also have some literacy initiatives. So we're trying to get young people reading for pleasure. It's one of the most important things that a young person, a child, can do,
Sure.
Not just for their cognitive development, but also to increase empathy, work on their imagination, to improve mental health, to reduce stress, to decrease loneliness. All sorts of benefits to reading. So we're trying to get more young people reading for pleasure. There's some horrifying statistics that over half of young people in the UK alone, say that they don't read for pleasure in their free time. And it's awful, but still today, not every child in this country owns a book of their own. So we do make regular book donations to try and get them into young readers' hands, to make sure that people do have their own books. And then, of course, we try to make sure that those are great adventure stories that are going to be a gateway to reading for those young readers, to get them enjoying it and get them reading more. On top of that, we kind of do events with authors, taking them into schools. We do online events. And then we also try and bring all of the family of writers from the prize, keep everyone involved with us, and kind of ask them to get involved in future work where we can do events with them specifically aimed at unpublished or aspiring writers, to try and demystify kind of the art of writing, the craft of writing, but also the behind the scenes aspects of the publishing industry.
Have you had much feedback from kids, as it were, who have been introduced to reading? I mean, I just think of how I'm sure it's probably true for all five of us, that reading was so formative in our lives and such a part of developing one's imagination. I mean, of course, TV and movies were as well, but reading was central. I mean, have you had yet people say, or parents say, "Oh, so and so's like, he or she is so much happier now." Or that's they always got their nose down in the book. Does that actually happen?
It happens particularly with the young writers that we work with, and I think that's because of the way that we treat them through the prize. So we've given them an incentive, an opportunity to kind of take part in a competition to write their own adventure story. And like Tom said, we have writers from all across the world, all different ages, taking part in this. And we commend 80 of them on top of shortlisting 10. And all of those 80 receive feedback on their stories,
Okay.
which is it's an incredible piece of work to do, but it's also
that's a huge effort,
it's a huge effort, but it's so worth it because it means that we treat all of these writers as they should be. We treat them as professionals, and one day maybe they will become the next Emma Styles. Maybe they will write the next No Country for Girls. And the feedback that we see coming in from those, the editorial feedback that we send out, the feedback we receive coming in from parents, from teachers, is one of the things that makes us stop and go, "Oh, it's really worth doing what we're doing, isn't it?"
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Children who've been supported and encouraged to write more, whose maybe parents' English isn't their first language. So they're getting feedback from us and from other places. Children who just have that little nudge and then want to go away and write more stories and are asking what other competitions are around, what else can they enter? And then actually children who come back and say, "Oh, I know I didn't win, but I'm going to keep trying. And where can I access the stories? I want to read the winners. They sound like they're going to be amazing." It's amazing how supportive of each other they all are.
That's brilliant. And in fact, that's going to be my next point, because, of course, one of the things you do, which I think is both is great for readers and also amazing for the writers, is you actually publish the stories, the young people's short stories.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find them?
Absolutely. Yes, please. We have a fantastic partner in the global literacy charity World Reader. And their mission is to make everyone a reader. And they're particularly working with young readers up to around the age of 12. And they have an app called Booksmart. So you can download that from the Apple Store, from Android, from Google Play. So this year it's been published in an anthology called Aliens, Apocalypse and the Afterlife, which you'll be able to find directly on their Booksmart app.
Something for everyone there. Have you yet had people who, as it were, entered in the kind of one age group and they come back as they get older to enter in another age group? So repeat offenders, as it were.
We do. It's really interesting, actually, because we read all of the submissions blind. Of course, the young writers' details are concealed. We work with an incredible team of volunteers, whether they're English literature students, whether they are librarians, whether they are teachers, to help us read all of these fantastic stories that we have in. And then when it comes through to the commendations, we internally can see their names, and there are names that we recognise year on year. And we know that's because they're fantastic writers and they're working their way through. They're being commended or shortlisted, even in a couple of cases, a few times over.
I think that's great. I think it's really great. I mean, after all, if you think about sports, people go out through different age groups. They don't necessarily drop out of just because they haven't won something under 14s. They don't just drop out. They could keep on going up through it's a similar sort of thing. They stick with it.
Absolutely. And we try to keep them all in touch with us. Once they've kind of graduated out of the Author of Tomorrow, the 21 and over, we try to encourage them to keep writing as much as they can. And hopefully one day we'll see them coming back and entering other categories of the prize.
That's the other thing, because you also have adults who've not been published. And
we do.
And I thought that was really... And then, for example, there was one chap I actually got talking to afterwards that, who had written a novel based on the disappearance, one of those jets which disappeared over the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, or whatever it was. And they just had this idea about, and I probably shouldn't give away what the idea was, but he had an idea related to that, which was a brilliant idea. And it had been in his head for like 9 years. And finally he'd written something. And for him to then get to be seen, to be read, to be heard, to be recognised. That's an incredibly important and wonderful thing to be able to do for somebody.
Absolutely. I think it's also that's a really important thing to remember, that our New Voices Award, which is for unpublished writers, we take them through from those early ideas to a finished manuscript over the course of kind of the next 9 months. We know that the early ideas, they have to submit the first opening chapters as a writing sample, but we know they might have been percolating for years in their head before they've actually maybe had the time to be able to start getting those down on paper. And then we have other people who just thought, you know what, I saw the award and I thought, I want to give this a go. What shall I write about? So we have writers from all sorts of different backgrounds and from different levels of experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually my publishing career got started like that. I entered a competition for unpublished writers, which was a first chapter and a synopsis, and I came runner-up. And then the publishers wanted to see the rest of the manuscript. I'm like, well, there is no rest of the manuscript. so then it was like a massive panic to write it as quickly as possible. So I'm sort of jealous of these authors of these new voices who are going to get so much support and mentoring to develop their manuscript.
It is, from doing it, we know it's a big ask to try and get it done over the course of 9 months.
Can I just say, this is the most spooky coincidence, because my fiction writing career began by coming second in a competition also. And it was something called the World One Day Novel Cup. We literally had 24 hours divided into two 12-hour sessions on a Saturday and Sunday to write a novel, or to write a story.
A whole novel.
I think I wrote 17,000 words, something absolutely insane. Wow. And I came second. And then the book then got bought here, and it got bought in other odd countries. So I was getting German royalties for like a decade afterwards, but it never was a huge hit. But it got me started. I mean, I'd been a journalist for years and years before that, but I'd not gone into fiction. And that sort of a thing can make such a difference. I mean, there's both of us. Here we are. Both have got into our fiction writing careers because of being seen and given a little bit of a leg up in a contest of some kind.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so important for writers to have someone who champions their work, because it's so hard to do all of that yourself. You know, you're not just expected to be a writer a lot of the time these days. You're also expected to be a speaker, to be able to do your publicity tours. You'll probably be running your own social media.
TikToker and a YouTuber.
Exactly. But to have other people out there who are shouting about how good your work is and how much other people should be reading it and paying attention to it because they're probably going to enjoy it. Hopefully that's really helpful.
The other thing I think is almost unique about the New Voices Award is that no one wins it, which I think is brilliant. There's no kind of open the golden envelope and the winner is. There are, is it 4 or 5?
There's 5. Yeah. We just open the door to a year of incredibly hard work.
But because am I right? I think has the award changed over the years? I think originally there was one winner, and there seemed to be like a conscious decision to open it out.
Definitely.
So there'd be more people. None of them wins in terms of, walking off with a big trophy.
No.
But more people get this amazing experience of the recognition.
I think we realised that we could have more of an impact and support more writers in a more efficient way by working with them at the very beginning of their idea, rather than working with a manuscript when it's finished. And then trying to help them edit it and giving them introductions to agents, introductions to publishers. We thought, you know what, there's so much more that we could do at the beginning. So they get these 9 months of one-to-one mentoring and one-to-one editorial guidance with an excellent editor. And there are ups and downs throughout that process. And then at the end of that, they have their finished first draft, and that goes it's actually to Bonnier Books, who we have a partnership with. And they read it and they give kind of feedback from a publisher as well, including not just editorial, but branding, feedback in terms of where their novel could sit in the market, who they imagine those readers might be. then we try and give them some guidance. And then unfortunately, we kind of have to let go of their hand and push them off out of the nest and let them fly by themselves, to try and find themselves an agent and a publisher. It's an amazing process. But like I say, they enter it, they've submitted their opening chapters. So the next stage for them is to get feedback on those manuscripts while they're starting to write on their next kind of 15,000 words, the next tranche.
Have Bonnie ever said, you know what, don't pass that on to anybody else. We'll have this one. Have they actually just taken any in the course of? Right?
Well, so they used to offer a publishing deal as the first prize when we had it as a whole manuscript competition. So there are books that have been published through that. Some of those authors are now onto their second books. So we like to look at it as that really was kind of the start of a kind of a writing career. Of this format, this is the second year that we've run it in this way. So we're now at that you have to leave the nest moment from the first cohort of New Voices writers. But they are 5 incredible manuscripts, so I'm sure that they are going to find their way out into the world very soon.
I have to say, by the way, that the main prize is a prize worth fighting for. Tom and I both turned to us and went, my God, that much?
£10,000, yeah. And possibly the biggest trophy in the literary world.
A mega trophy. It's bigger than the World Cup. I mean, it's huge. It's vast. It
is a very beautiful trophy, which I have already polished.
Yeah, it's very shiny. You can see your own face in it.
Because these days, trophies tend to be little blocks of kind of acrylic, like transparent acrylic with something vaguely etched on them, and they're very disappointing. They're like paperweights, basically.
Yeah. Whereas Emma, perhaps you could describe what the trophy looks like for listeners who weren't lucky enough to be there in person.
Well, I can't show people, obviously, but I do have it on my desk. Yes, it's a beautiful. It's really quite heavy. I did say to a friend, it was probably a group of friends in a little WhatsApp message yesterday, that it would actually probably make quite an effective murder weapon.
It's spoken like a true crime writer.
That's so true.
I am a crime writer, so I don't want anyone to be alarmed at that.
And I suspect if you hit someone's skull with the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize, it probably would sound like smashing up a pumpkin. I mean,
I'm sure it would.
Yeah, I tell you what, if Charlie had one of those on top of her fridge at the crucial moment.
Exactly. It has got some sharp, pointy bits. It's just beautiful. I don't even know what it's made of, but it's shiny and gold, and with the beautiful Wilbur and Niso Smith Foundation logo, which is a fountain pen nib and a crossed spear with something. I don't know what
it's a knobkerry. It's a Zulu fighting stick.
Yeah, because and also the nib actually looks like it might be a shield as well.
It does look like that also. Yes, it's incredibly beautiful, and it has and it's got amazingly my name and the title of the book,
which by the way would make it not such a good weapon because they'll know exactly who used it.
Exactly. Yes, that would be.
Also, as we learned on the night, it actually takes fingerprints.
It really does,
well.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, being so shiny. So I'm going to ask you a really vulgar question of Emma, which is, what are you going to do with the money?
Amazingly, no one has yet asked me that, but I suppose
there you go. Tom Harper, the Wilbur Smith podcast goes to places where other people have far too much tact to go.
To be honest, I am going to actually live on that money. And it is going to help me finish writing the next book.
Brilliant.
Which, I had got...
Georgina's clapping her hands in delight.
Yes,
because
book
this is what
two.
she wants
for all sorts of reasons I won't go into. I had got to a somewhat precarious financial place. And so it's kind of a bit of a life changer having that money, actually, which is amazing. Because, so many people have said to me, since the book came out, don't give up the day job, Emma, don't give up the day job, which I hadn't intentionally done, but various things conspired to shrink the day job to fairly insignificant. And partly that's because, as Georgina said a few minutes ago, you're given this. I mean, I didn't expect to get this, even that this book would be published. All of that did happen as a result of me writing it on the course at UEA. But you're given this kind of full-time job of being an author. And it just, obviously, to whatever extent you let it, takes over your whole life. And that is absolutely what's happened, which I wouldn't want it any other way. But to make space now to just knuckle down and write is what I need
fantastic.
to do.
I can't think of I was going to say I can't think of a better way to spend it. I can think of lots of better ways to spend it, actually. But they would be fleeting. And
spending it to enable more writing is actually
that is the best way to spend it.
You know, absolutely. It's yes, it's incredible, and it will also it'll also mean that I can go back to Western Australia for some time this coming summer, which I need to do for research purposes, amongst other things. So,
wonderful.
Yeah, it's been the whole thing has just, as I have said, it's made my year. So
good news. How many? There's not a lot of good news around. This is good news.
That is true.
Emma, is anything else you need to say that you feel it's sort of not been covered? I think we sort of gave a good impression of the book without giving it away.
No, I think we did really well with that. Yeah.
I think so. One thing I could say, actually, and if it works to edit it in, that's fine. But it was partly in response. I realised that Tom had asked, about writing from away, kind of thing, and so one of the, as I have said, I write. I do write. I have written and still write out of homesickness for Western Australia, and I do think there's a particular situation when you're writing from afar and you're writing from vivid memories and you're writing out of love for a place that almost facilitates the conjuring up of place better than if you're actually there. I think that's been my experience, although I do need to go there and I do need to ask when I'm not there. I need to ask family and friends for certain sensory impressions. But yes, writing from a distance has really helped me conjure that landscape.
That's a really good point. It sort of intensifies the memories and strips away all stuff that doesn't matter. So you're just distilling it almost into the most vivid version of itself.
Yeah, that's really been my experience of doing it.
Honestly, I've been reading so much this week because Chris has us reading tons of stuff for next week's podcasts. Plus, I'm reading stuff for the stuff I'm working on at the moment. And I picked up your book yesterday, really kind of read out, and it's such a blast of absolute energy. It's just like amazing. Just when I thought I couldn't read another word, suddenly it's like, oh my god, I'm completely hooked. I've got to read this. So that's amazing.
This is very not quick. I cheated because I thought to myself, okay, this is so intense. I'm going to go to the end because I need to know.
My mother does that. That's how my mother reads books. She can't bear the tension, so she always reads the end first.
It was like I don't know if I can bear to get so involved with these characters. It's just so intense, and then it's just going to leave me completely washed out and drained and exhausted and unhappy. And I was so relieved that it wouldn't. So now I feel thoroughly empowered to go back, read the whole thing. Like, yes,
read the middle.
Yeah.
That's good. That's lovely to hear. I mean, there's a bit of a body count in there, but
it's not so much that it's they think, oh, I'm really going to get involved in these characters.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure if I can bear the distress of them suffering too much.
I was going to say,
well, we're going to do a bit of that. Sorry, but
but suffering is okay so long as there's redemption at the end.
There was one, when we shortlist and longlist the books, Emma, we've told you this many times, and I believe you had the pleasure of meeting him. But when we shortlist and longlist them, we work with a whole team of librarians who read all of the submissions. And then we have a round table where we fight it out and they have to advocate for their favourite books. And each book has been read by multiple people. And quite often it's quite clear which ones are going to make the long list and the short list, because that's when the passion and the drive really comes out. And No Country for Girls came up in our discussion, and one of our librarians just was asked his opinion, and he paused. There was a moment of silence, and he just said, "I would die on a hill for this book."
How wonderful!
I'm like, okay, tell us why. Tell us why. This is exactly what we want to hear.
That was the most amazing thing that anyone's ever said to me about anything I've written. And I was so looking forward to meeting him, and I did meet him. And he was, I would, when we had a little chat, which was just so incredible. And he said a very interesting thing, actually. So he said that he was a little disappointed, maybe not disappointed, but when he got to the end, he felt he wanted more. He wanted more from the characters. He wanted to know how things go for them. It was almost disappointment, especially with Nao's character. I think it was like he was almost saying, I kind of wanted to know, he wanted her to have taken another step on her journey in terms of her identity. And that was so interesting, because I knew I couldn't take that step with her. I kind of got her to that point. And then I did feel that her next step isn't really my story to tell, because it is much more about her First Nations identity. And I knew that I couldn't do it. But it was so interesting that he had brought that up.
Isn't that the best thing, though, in a book where you put it down and you're just so sad to be taken away from that world, and you just want to be in that world for longer, and you want to know more about what happens to those people. And that's the sign of a really great book, is that you immediately think, oh my God, what's going to happen here? What happens? How I want to be there. I can't bear it. They're taking me away from this wonderful place,
I know, you're right. That is the best thing about finishing a great book. And I've had a lot of people say that to me. And, I was walking back to the Tube Wednesday night with Felicity, and she was saying that to me. And I thought, okay, this is a surreal moment. It's not every day you walk to the Tube with a polar explorer who tells you all the things they love about your book and why they're bereft, and why those characters, stayed. She kind of said those characters stayed with all of us for quite some time.
Because I had a few comments on the night about what an excellent title No Country for Girls was. Was that a title that you came up with?
It was the title that I came up with, which I'm so proud of, because quite often, your title doesn't stick, and your publisher decides they want to come up with a different one. It wasn't the title all the way through. I think I came up with it probably towards the end of the first draft. It had country in the title right from the beginning. I can't now remember what the working title was early on, but it didn't have girls in it. But I think as the gold story, the kind of epic nature of this gold theft and everything that comes out of that, and this kind of the foolishness of going on the run with something that bad dudes are going to come chasing after, was so reminiscent of Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, and that's really where the title came from.
Yeah, it's a wonderful sort of subversion of it, or alternative take. It's great.
I should probably just pop in what the Foundation's mission is, because I realise I didn't entirely say that. So the Foundation was established by Wilbur and Niso Smith in 2015, and we hosted our first prize in 2016. But the Foundation's mission as a whole is to support writers, to promote literacy, and to advance adventure writing as a genre. Which is a fantastic umbrella heading, and really, really takes everything that we do, really takes that on board, that spirit of adventure.
Brilliant. And if our listeners have been inspired, as they should have been by listening to this podcast, to submit their own work for next year's competitions, where can they find details?
On our website, which is www.wilbur-niso-smithfoundation.org. If you Google Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize, it will come up.
Yeah, and I would encourage everyone, if you have any inclination to write anything remotely adventurous, do enter these competitions because they're wonderful, wonderful events. And as we've heard from Emma, can be life-changing. So thank you very much to Georgina and to Emma for joining us 2 days after the events. I think we've all recovered from the festivities, but it was great to have you here. Great to hear about the work of the prizes, and hopefully we'll have you back to talk about other books and other things in future. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And I'll add a final congratulations to Emma again.
Thank you so much.
So that's all we have time for this week, but we'll see you soon for another episode of That Wilbur Smith Show.
That Wilbur Smith Show is produced by Christopher Wynne. Music by Dewey DeLay. Executive producer Niso Smith.